This episode of Trifles is made possible by listeners like you who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the colorman was retired, the three-quarter was missing, and the client was illustrious, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever wondered why Sherlock Holmes had 3 different colored dressing gowns? Or what a Crockford is?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 453, The Location of Baskerville Hall. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, are you?
Darn it.
Have you sufficiently located yourself today?
I was here a minute ago.
Oh.
And the problem with me is that I'm so easily distracted. I get involved in something else, but I think I'll be back in a minute.
Okay, well, drop a pin.
Okay. Ow.
Now you got to look for it.
Okay, hold on a minute.
Let
me just get this haystack out of the way.
I was going to say, you should not have dropped it in that haystack. Oh, we've been doing this for too long.
Yes, we have. Goodbye.
We have a wonderful episode ready for you today. This is one of the Morley-Montgomery Award-winning episodes. Well, it's not the episode that won the Morley-Montgomery Award. It is an episode that covers articles that have won the Morley-Montgomery Award. And if you are not familiar with that, that is the award given to the best article published in the Baker Street Journal in any given year. And this episode's subject comes from 1979, and it's by Howard Brody. It appeared in volume 29, number 4 of December 1979 in the Baker Street Journal. And the judges that year for the Morley-Montgomery Award were William Jenkins, P. Christian Steinbrunner, that's Chris Steinbrunner to those who know him, our friend Otto Penzler, and Don Redmond. And they selected this paper for the win. And it's obviously with the fall coming on, the Hound of the Baskervilles comes into everyone's consciousness, and it is it's a cornerstone of the canon. So it'll be a lively discussion, I'm sure. For those of you who would like to support the show, we do have a couple of options available on Patreon and on Substack. If you are a supporter there at any amount from as little as $1 a month up through, whatever you choose to donate, you have access to bonus material. We just dropped another episode of Trifling Trifles. That's where we don't blather on for as long. See, that's the key. If you want to hear less of us, you have to pay a premium. Right? That's how this works. Trifling Trifles are shorter shows, the way we started out this podcast back 9 years ago. But they're shorter shows about less involved topics. So the latest one is about typewriters in the canon. That might be interesting for you to go check that out. They're available in a collection in our Patreon profile, which you can find at patreon.com/trifles, and they're available as a separate section on our Substack at trifles.substack.com. Drop by there, check those out, and let us know what you think. Okay, we are off to Dartmoor in this episode with the location of Baskerville Hall. Now, Bert, this is, I would say this is probably one of those iconic searches that so many Sherlockians undertake, because Baskerville Hall is iconic. It's where Sir Henry was headed. It's where so much of the action took place in probably the best known novel of Sherlock Holmes. And it just oozes with setting and mystique, and we've got the moor nearby and the fog rolling in, and people have been searching for Baskerville Hall for decades. What are we going to learn differently from Howard Brody?
Well, that's a great question. What are we going to learn differently? Well, we're going to learn, I suppose, the architecture of an investigation, because Howard says, one of the things I want to do is just mention a little bit about Howard in a minute, but one of the things he says in his start of all of this, or at least he tells you, I think maybe through a footnote. No, I think he says it pretty much up front somewhere. He says he hasn't been there. So, although he'd be happy if somebody would give him a ticket. He'd love to go and wander around. But he's doing this from maps and very Sherlockian and very Doylean, because of course Conan Doyle, since he had no familiarity with London when he was writing about Sherlock Holmes, was using post office maps and things like that. So Howard has tapped other resources and other Sherlockians, including Bliss Austin and lots of other people, which we'll tell you about. So this is what we're going to learn, is really how you might go about investigating where one of these locations would be, relying on all of these reference sources. But Howard was a great Sherlockian. He just died last July. Howard Brody, he was invested as Anstruther in 1981, and he was an academic, a professor, a bioethicist. He led the Institute for Medical Humanities at the U of T, at University of Texas Medical Center. And he was also involved in life sciences at Michigan State University. I think they had a center for ethics and humanities there. He was a family physician and a bioethicist and a devoted Sherlockian. And, a really interesting guy who I say, was with us until just last July. But he begins this really deservedly Morley-Montgomery Award-winning paper by saying, look, let me tell you what I'm about to do here. I am going to argue that Baskerville Hall either was identical with a building called Hayford Hall in southeastern Dartmoor near Buckfastleigh, or else was located very near that site. Now, it might seem, here it is, he says, it might seem presumptuous to offer such a theory, as I can't claim to have made any on-the-spot reconnaissance at Dartmoor, but my only justification is that previous theories have been utterly inadequate. And so investigating this is really called for. And this is really important because in the canon, there are very few other adventures in which topography plays such a major role in events. And so he begins with, now again, this is from 1979, isn't it, this paper?
Yeah.
1979, 2 years before he was invested. And he says, look, let's start with Baring Gould, who searched Dartmoor for places that corresponded to Watson's descriptions. And there we have the presence of a yew alley. And that's one of the reasons why Baring Gould picked Baskerville Hall and identified it with Lew House and Lew Trenchard. And oddly enough, says Howard, I imagine it was a coincidence that a former resident of Lew House was the Reverend Sabine Baring Gould, who was an ancestor of Bill Baring Gould's and the author of a Dartmoor guidebook. It must be a complete coincidence. Baring Gould found similar grounds for claiming that the Grimpen hamlet was actually Widcombe in the Moor and that Coombe Tracy was Bovey Tracy. And now Howard just zips us through this in just the first two paragraphs of this paper.
And, I love the premise that he said he's going to determine the proper location of Baskerville Hall by eliminating all of the other analyses that have gone before. And this really speaks to this Sherlockian process, the process that Holmes himself would use, because when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And in Howard Brody's case, whatever improbable remains must be Baskerville Hall. So Howard rightly states that the approach that Baring Gould took in identifying things that looked familiar as Watson's descriptions laid them out, he said that wouldn't work because he didn't take into account crucial spatial relationships. That is, the distances between some locations. Watson states that, there's a walk of, 4 miles along the edge of the moor, and it takes you from Baskerville Hall to Grimpen. But when it comes to Lou House, that Baring Gould identified, if you wanted to get to Widcombe in the Moor, that's 17 miles. That's slightly longer than 4, for those of you that have followed the Professor Moriarty at-home mathematics school. It's a subscription course. You can write in if you want more details. But yeah, 17 is greater than 4. Now, worse, he says Lou House is some 4 miles from the moor proper and is situated in a relatively populated area. And of course, we know in The Hound of the Baskervilles, Baskerville Hall is remotely located and it's directly overlooking the moor. So these very spatial relationships that Brody points out don't work with the Watson narrative, even if the description of what they might look like does. Now he says there's another approach to the location. I should say he also mentioned the train, the London Express that Lestrade took up and stopped at Coombe Tracy, had to be a direct train. And Bovey Tracy, that Baring Gould identifies, on a branch railway, and it's an unlikely stop for an express. So there you go with that. Now, Julian Wolfe, in looking at the moor, Julian Wolfe was known for his cartography, his maps. And he does take into account all the objections that Brody just listed to the Baring Gould theory, but he doesn't make any attempt to match his results with actual Dartmoor place names. Right, so we've got the insistence that Grimpenmire is Watsonese for what is really Grimspound Bog, and Baring Gould and Michael Harrison are firm on this point. And they offer a photo of the bog as proof. But when we look at an 1892 and a 1966 map, and 3 guidebooks that Howard consulted, they don't make any mention of Grimspound Bog. And he said there's Grimspound in the vicinity of Widcombe in the Moor, but it's a prehistoric stone circle, and the ground is too high for swampy terrain. So, and he evidently has the source of Ruth St. Ledger Gordon, a lifelong Dartmoor inhabitant. And see, eyewitness account here. This is interesting. And she says she takes the Grimpenmire to be Fox Tor Mire, which is commonly cited as the most fearful of Dartmoor bogs.
Well, and Ruth St. Ledger Gordon apparently wrote a book in 1972 called Witchcraft and Folklore of Dartmoor. So here is Howard busily consulting these additional sources and sort of laying the whole thing out for you. Well, and bear in mind, too, that what Howard's doing here is treating Watson as the source of reality. He's taking Watson's expression of distances. Remember the so-called spatial relationships. That turned out to be, Howard just mentioned that in the start of all this, that's really the key here. He says these other people haven't taken into account the spatial relationships. So now, he says, having thus eliminated the impossible, we must turn to the clues provided by Watson, which would fix the actual locations. And Howard says, I've mentioned the 4-mile distance between the Hall and Grimpen, but here are the other clues. 1, the only places within a 5-mile radius of Baskerville Hall are Grimpen, Merripit House, Laughter Hall, and 2 farmhouses. The prison at Princetown is said to be 14 miles away, but it doesn't fit any location on Dartmoor. So that's sort of point 1. Point 2, this Laughter Hall is 4 miles, L-A-F-T-E-R, Hall, is 4 miles south of the Hall and is on the road to Coombe Tracey. Coombe Tracey must therefore be farther to the south, as well as being on a main rail line. Third, Merripit House is quite isolated, as Sir Henry noted when he wanted to send his groom to sleep there, in case there was trouble from the escaped convict. The house can be reached by a path across the moor from the Hall, but is also accessible by road. So you see, Howard has done this sort of detailed reading and parsing of Hound of the Baskervilles, and points out that Holmes directed Sir Henry to drive there on the near-fatal night. And that's a path that also runs near Grimpen Mire. 4, the hut where Holmes hid has to be within telescope range of Laughter Hall and within a reasonable walk from Coombe Tracey. The village of Fernworthy, the site of Franklin's activities, must be nearby also. 5, Watson and Sir Henry reached Baskerville Hall through a small halt-on-demand railroad station. Presumably, this was not the Coombe Tracey station. The smaller station must have been closer to the Hall, or else the two presumably would have taken the same London Express as Lestrade did later. And then his last point here is 6th point. He says, Watson states that Barrymore signaled onto the moor from a western window, suggesting that the moor was west of the Hall, i.e. that the Hall and consequently the hamlet of Grimpen are to be found along the eastern edge of the moor. So there's Howard's 6-point summary.
That's fascinating. So what he's done is he's built a case of these 6 different requirements and needs to fit something to needs to find something to fit into that narrative. And he said now it remains to find a section of Dartmoor that fits these relationships. And he's got ordnance survey maps that are detailed, but they show towns and buildings that weren't in existence in 1888 when the story took place, when Watson and Holmes visited there. But Howard says, fear not, he was able to consult an 1892 map as well. And that comes from, oh goodness, I want to make sure I have the reference correct here.
John Lloyd W. Page.
Thank you.
An exploration of Dartmoor and its antiquities from 1892. Now, where he found this, I don't somewhere
know.
In the library.
Yeah. So he returns to other Sherlockian scholarship. He notes Bliss Austin noted that the history of Squire, is that Cabell or Cable, of Brooke seems to parallel the dark record of Hugo Baskerville, right? So you've got a ripped from the headlines inspiration for Sir Hugo. And Branch Cabell, a descendant of the original Squire, had a narrative that talked about the Black Hounds racing over Dartmoor in October of 1677. Right, so that puts us right within that Regency period of the legend, and you know, they're breathing smoke and fire and howling, and the body that was found was badly mangled, scorched here and there, a throat torn open. So very much a similar narrative to the Hound legend. But the Squire's black doings didn't cease with his death, according to legend. And to prevent him from wandering around the moor, as Bliss Austin recorded further, the parish of Buckfastleigh erected a stone pagoda-like structure over Sir Richard's grave. And the local legend has it that the Squire will gnaw one's finger if you insert it through a keyhole. Might be the giant rat on the other side, who knows? But small wonder then, he says, that Brooke Manor assumes the top place as candidate for Baskerville Hall. Professor Ralph Turner of the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State asked on arrival at Buckfastleigh in 1979 to be directed to Baskerville Hall, and an obliging native unhesitatingly guided him to Brook Manor. But Brody says there are nevertheless major objections because Brook Manor is located in the middle of the woods and streams and is a mile or so east of the moor proper.
Well, we should tell you, listener, that at this point in the essay, what Howard's done is drawn his own map. And it really is a lovely little thing. So you can tell how deeply he got into this. I mean, Julian must have been very pleased and impressed to find another amateur cartographer here. Environs of Baskerville Hall by Howard Brody, south quarter of the Forest of Dartmoor. It's occupies quite, well, it's a full page in the Baker Street Journal. And it's really nicely done. So we're sort of getting to the end here. He says, as you've just heard, he says, Brook Manor is located in the middle of woods and streams and is a mile or so east of the moor. The modern map indicates another house, Hayford Hall. I can't document that Hayford Hall was in existence in 1888, but suppose for the sake of argument that Baskerville Hall is Hayford Hall, well, with this supposition, many pieces of the puzzle fall into place. We first note the road from Hayford Hall takes us past Buckfastleigh to a station on the small branch railway from Totnes to Ashburton, a likely spot for the halt-on-demand station that from which Watson and Sir Henry alighted. The ride to the hall crosses a stream. There's a walk of some 2 miles along the edge of the moor to the north of the hall. That leads to the hamlet of Holna, which I will nominate as Grimpen. Page described Holna in 1892 as having a church and nothing else of interest, which seems to fit Watson's small gray hamlet. And Page's map also shows Scoreton. Scoreton's on the modern map between the hall and Holna, but even today this is a mere crossroads. Might have been only a cottage or two in 1888. And then Howard takes us through the rest of this. The road from Buckfastleigh follows the south bank of the River Dart. There isn't any house on the region there. And then within 2 miles of both Hayford Hall and Merripit House is the swampy headwater of the River Avon, known as Owen or Avon Head. And there are many mires here with abandoned tin mines and tinners' huts. Certainly a likely spot for the Grimpen mire. And, he tells us a little bit more about the area. Rabbit poachers overheard, according to some legend, the baying of the wish-hounds on a Sunday, and the dogs were terrified. So he draws the conclusion one would be hard put to find another area of the moor where it could be more truly said that the powers of evil are most exalted.
I like that. It fits the theme. And looking south of Hayford Hall, I go about 5 miles down to South Brent, which is on the main railway between Exeter and Plymouth. And Brent isn't a particularly interesting place, but it seems the best candidate for Coombe Tracy. And so you'd expect to find Laughter Hall a bit to the north, maybe near the town of Lutton, which does not appear on the 1892 map. The village of Fernworthy would be close by, and since the River Avon runs through the woods here, you'd have the offending village picnic that so roused the ire of Frank the Crank, Mr. Franklin, who was always telling people off and warning them off of his property. And then north of Laughter Hall is more open ground, and that's near Shipley Tor, which is where you'd find those Neolithic huts where Holmes possibly took up residence. Remember when he was hiding out, and Watson found the recently abandoned hut with telltale signs of Holmes there. And across Avon is Black Tor. Watson mentions that as the spot where he and Sir Henry saw the mysterious man on the night of the convict chase. Now, that mysterious man, of course, was Holmes. And then Watson, as he approached that area where Holmes was hiding, he climbed, like he mentioned, Belliver and Vixen Tor. Presumably, he was looking west into the sunset, and neither. I guess both Belliver and Vixen Tors do exist on Dartmoor, but unfortunately they're too far away to be seen from the proposed location. So Watson instead would have seen Sharp Tor to the southwest, and farther to the north he might have seen Fox Tor, which is just off the map on here. And Fox might have suggested Vixen when Watson came to write his account.
Well, and Howard really digs into this, and I don't know that it's going to mean too much to you listeners just sort of listening to his describe any more of these places. But the point here is that he has really dug into Watson's narrative, compared it to maps, found period maps, is dealing with the spatial relationships, thinking about what the people in the case would have seen and how it lines up with what we know that they did. And it's, it's really fascinating. He points out that Watson was clearly wrong on one distance. So here is his sort of first and only correction of Watson. This Princetown must be more like 8 miles from Baskerville Hall rather than 14. So maybe his other distances are off by a different, similar proportion. And that's one of the reasons why he's put his Grimpen-Meyer, Holne, less than the full 4 miles from the Hall. And it could be that Watson made certain changes because of brevity. Interestingly enough, he says, the map that I have now created includes some places of interest which aren't mentioned in the Hound. For instance, along the stream called Dean Burn, south of Buckfastleigh, is to be found Hound's Pool. And legend states that nearby lived a certain Weaver Knowles, who startled his family by appearing after he died as a ghost, still hard at work at his loom. Boy, that would be a little annoying, I would think. It would seem, says Howard, to have been rather an advantage to have a ghost producing saleable goods while at the same time being no drain upon the family larder. But this economic point of view eluded the Knowles family, who consulted the local vicar on the best way to remove this spirit. And the vicar lured the weaver's ghost into the churchyard and then threw at it a handful of mold from a gravesite, transforming the spirit at once into a black hound. And the vicar then led the hound to the stream and gave it a perforated nutshell, as one is wont to do, with which to empty one of the pools. And the weaver's soul will rest, it is said, when the pool has thus been emptied. And the hound is still at work at this task in the pool that bears his name. Well, that's just charming. Although, says Howard, it doesn't do anything further to prove our identification, since there are black hound legends all over Dartmoor and Devonshire, as we have seen. Yeah. But at least this corner of Dartmoor still has the proper supernatural ambiance.
There you go. That's what's most important here. And Howard wraps it up. This is what I love about the Sherlockian scholarship process. He invites other people to analyze his approach, to build on it, to take it down, etc. He said, Sherlockians more astute than I will no doubt find more flaws with this proposal, but it's high time that the Baskerville matter is settled satisfactorily, and I will look forward with interest to the emergence of a better theory, if one can be found. Meanwhile, anyone wishing to make a proper Sherlockian pilgrimage to Dartmoor would be advised to seek out Buckfastleigh and then head toward the site of Hayford Hall, preferably by daylight.
And that is a substantial trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Welcome, Sir Henry. Welcome to Baskerville Hall.
Thank you.